don't forget that knowledge is power. So understanding what you're saying and the choices that you can make and the decisions that you can make is really, really important, because through those decisions and through that knowledge, that's how we can navigate our life in terms of where we want to go. Don't give up. Know that there's always, you've always got options. There's always alternative solutions, and there is a way to win all of these difficult challenges that we are, I guess, put into for a reason.
Hello everyone, I would like to welcome Mariya Shmandiy to the Project Vitality podcast. So I've known you for a couple of years now.
Yeah,
not too long, but she has a very, very interesting story, and that's why I decided to get her on the podcast. Now, you lived a very normal life before maybe, 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago, I'd say I lived a pretty mainstream life.
All right, so
that way.
so let's start with, you lived a little bit of, many of us would call a mainstream life, were you? Or were you always a little bit out there?
No, I'd say pretty mainstream life.
Yeah. Okay, so 3 years ago, something happened that kind of woke you up to what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So can you please tell the audience what that was?
So in early 2020, just as we were going into the first lockdown in March, nothing was adding up to me. So I started researching, and then somehow got added to a Telegram channel, and then it was just like mind-blowing amount of information, just link after link after link. And I'd say by Easter of 2020, I felt that I knew pretty much everything that was going on, the agenda, what the plan was in terms of the centralisation of the world and the Australian government, globalisation, all of those sorts of things. So it went pretty deep, I would say, in a very quick time.
Yeah, interesting. So for me, when all this stuff happened, I kind of understood there was a bit of nonsense happening in the world. I don't think I went on the depth and the level that you have. The kind of thing that, like, for me, that just really stood out is I'd been studying health for a long time. Mm-hmm. I'd had my own journey with health, and then all this kind of nonsense marketing from like footy players and just TV presenters telling me to do this thing where you could just tell it was a massive marketing. So I've worked in direct sales for a very long time and sales. So straight away, I was like, this is just the same as them promoting a shampoo or an aftershave or a perfume that they don't use. They're just doing it because someone's telling them, their manager or whoever controls them is telling them, you now promote this, and they just do it and they don't think. And I just remember being like, why is this person who has absolutely no idea trying to tell me what to do with my own body, and why is it so forcefully done? And that's what, for me, I was like, because it's so forcefully done, because it is like, it's literally just a almost billion-dollar marketing campaign.
Yeah. A
global marketing campaign. And so straight away, I was like, all right, I haven't been to a doctor in years. I don't need a doctor for my health. Mm-mm. As soon as I shifted away from going to doctors and modern medicine and that kind of pharmaceutical route, that's when my health improved dramatically, and everything around my life improved. And I started meeting people that, like, you never get a person that was in modern medicine that walked away from modern medicine that ever goes back, because they just start to feel better and everything improves. And so that's kind of what opened me up to it. And then I kind of just started to see the depths of corruption.
And it's interesting you say, you talk about natural medicine, because I've always been brought up from the Eastern medicine techniques. So
you were a little bit hippie.
For me, that side of things was always questionable. Like, growing up, we never used antibiotics. We never used cold and flu tablets. It was always alternative herbal medicine and things like that. So funny that I actually worked in that industry. In 2020, I actually worked in the health industry.
So pharmaceuticals.
Yeah,
one of them, right?
And I realised my background's not health, so it was business management. So I saw it very quickly. Like you said, it was a real big marketing scam.
Yeah.
Massive marketing scam. And from a business perspective, more so, because I saw it from a business perspective, I just couldn't understand why all these small businesses were getting closed down, shutting their doors. They were going out of business. yet all these mass global organizations, or not organizations, I'd say just huge
conglomerates, maybe?
Conglomerates, yeah, how they were still able to keep their doors open. You know, you could still go and get alcohol. You could still go to Bunnings.
Yeah. But it's all about your safety, though. So you could still, I know in places like Sydney and Melbourne, you could still go to get alcohol. You could still go to a brothel. Yeah.
Yeah.
You couldn't go to get organic things. You couldn't go to the gym.
Yeah.
You know, but a lot of the major fast foods outlets you could still get. So definitely all about your health.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so, you know, that's the thing is you just look at how things just don't add up. Like I think it was, another one for me was, I think it was Anzac Day, maybe in Melbourne, and they had the memorial closed off so people couldn't pay their respects. But on the same day, there was a footy game with 40,000 people in an arena. And it's like, that's just mental. And people are at that arena and they don't even think anything of it. It's like this virus was magically could target these certain areas. If you stood up or if you walk, you know, like.
I always said that the virus only travels upwards because as soon as you sat down and had a drink in your hand.
Then it's safe. I know, and that's the thing.
And effective.
I remember being on a plane once and, you know, I wasn't wearing a mask, but you're supposed to be wearing a mask. But, like, you know, if you've got a drink in your hand, like every time the air hostess had walked past, I just you know, just raise your glass, and they're like, oh, I can't really say anything because he's drinking or eating.
I know.
Yeah, so you kind of woke up to it all.
Yes.
Then what happened?
I guess I would say became an advocate.
Yep.
For
you one of those tinfoil hatters, are you? Wasn't specifically, you know, in general, everything's a conspiracy. It was more, I was so deeply concerned and disturbed by what was happening in terms of the medical industry and also in terms of people's employment. Yep.
And so with my background being in HR, I thought, well, how can I effectively apply this and actually help people? So we started our organisation called Informed Choice Network, which was just all built through individuals who were lawyers, medical practitioners and business, I guess, people with a business mind. And we all did it off our own backs, came together and decided we have to do something. How do we get out there? How do we create awareness? And this just took off overnight. There were so many people that contacted us. We had a website, and I think there was one day that we had 300 emails that we had to respond to, and some of them were really disturbing, you know, like, I'm considering taking my life, you know, all sorts of different things. And we realized, wow, this is like, we have to do something about this. So it came from that point of view more. Obviously, the other aspect that really disturbed me was going down, I guess you could say, the rabbit hole of how this is all linked to a spiritual war and the religious aspect of it, or the spiritual aspect of it in terms of, you know, it's not just the COVID factor, it's also they're starting from a really young age now to indoctrinate children, and it's taking away their innocence and taking away the fundamental principles of the values, that everything is built on all these fundamental values. So that was really disturbing for me as well.
I thought health was my top value until all this happened, and then I was like, freedom is my top value. Like, if we can't choose what we do with our own body, like, and we are punished, there is no difference to. I was quite vocal as well on social media, and I got a lot of people saying you can't say this, and specifically when I was comparing it to what happened in like Germany, like with Hitler, and I don't even know if that's true anymore. Like, but you know, with what happened, you know, like, people being segregated for certain principles. And, you know, if you look at what happened then and what happened kind of now, it's like, okay, you can't go to restaurants. You're a second-class citizen. It's exactly.
We had to wear a star, right?
Yeah.
And then with that star, we were identified as an alternative race, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I've been in Cambodia.
Yeah. And
this happened in our lifetime, is that a guy, Pol Pot, killed 1 out of 4 million people.
Genocide, yeah.
Genocide. And there was a list of, like, he wanted everyone to be the same. And the only reason that happened, and the only reason these things happen, is because Not because of crazy people like him, but because everybody else just like, oh yeah, no worries.
Complied.
Just complies. Yeah. And when you comply, there's something in my soul. I've always been a little bit rebellious. Not rebellious for the sake of rebelling. Like not just because like I just want to be a little shit. If something doesn't make sense to me, I question it. And I've always been like that. And I think it's really important for us to question, because as you said, indoctrination so young is you go to school, and if you give the right answers, you're rewarded. Okay? You're right. These are the right answers. If you question how we get to that answer or how we get to that solution, and is it actually the right answer, then you're punished. And, I remember when I was in high school, just a simple thing. It was, we had our roll call and you're supposed to read a book. And I would take my surfing magazines in because I was looking at the pictures, reading the articles about surfing because I was really into I was bodyboarding back then. And the teacher was like, you can't read them. And I would always be like, why? It's something I'm interested in. I'm reading. She's like, it has to be a book. If you don't want to read that, you sit outside. I'm like, okay, fine. So I just get kicked out every couple of days. I'd just be sitting outside reading the thing that I wanted to.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm going to pretend to read a book or do something that I'm not interested in. Then this doesn't make sense to me.
It sounds like my high school days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trouble for not wearing the correct uniform on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So, yes, we are definitely indoctrinated from a young age, but I think more than ever now. And I think the other thing important to note, which you mentioned where you said you weren't sure if it's true or not, is the fact that they are trying to rewrite history.
Yeah.
And there's misinformation, both sides, mainstream, mass misinformation, but there is also misinformation, unfortunately, on alternative news as well.
Oh, yeah. So I like the fact that
having to dissect that is a challenge.
I like the fact that the West is always the good guy.
Yeah.
Always, throughout history. Yeah. We're always the good guy. Everyone else is the bad guy. Every other religion, every other country is the bad guy. Yeah. We're good. We've never done anything wrong. Yeah. And like every movie portrays that. Every like TV series, every book is that. And maybe in other countries, it's the opposite. Like maybe they portray them as the good guys and us as the bad guys. Yeah. And the truth is that we all have good and bad in us. And, there's some horrible humans and maybe even entities or things from other dimensions or whatever that are in this realm that are kind of screwing with us and have been. And that's a kind of spiritual aspect of it. But the truth is we can all do bad things. And if we live in this delusion that we're the good guy or the good girl or the good country or the good, group of countries, like that's complete delusion. And that's kind of what we maybe accept too much. Like Australians, we're good, we're always on the right team, and maybe sometimes we're not.
Very compliant.
Yeah.
We're a very compliant race in Australia. That's what I noticed through COVID, was that how compliant people are and how much they don't question, and just simply the trust that they have in the system without doing any research. That just blew my mind.
Yeah. Australians, Canadians and Kiwis.
Yeah.
Too laissez-faire with everything.
Yeah.
She'll be right, mate.
We've always had it easy. We've never had a war.
No. And it's this generation, like me, you, our parents, the grandparents had a lot, but for the last kind of 40-odd years, it's been pretty chilled.
Yes.
And everything's been pretty easy. And it's like, they're saying that, good men and like, what's the saying where it's, you have people that generation that kind of don't stand up for things and then they make it hard for the next generation. And that's kind of what I can't remember the saying, but that's what's happened. People haven't stood up. And I used to really dislike Americans. So much that I actually went to America to prove myself wrong because I was like, they're obnoxious to this. And what I found is if you're in America, two things: don't talk about politics because it's always, they're very passionate, they're very heated, and it was actually very interesting. And don't talk about, kind of war or anything like that because they'll just get, they're very opinionated. But what I really loved about Americans is they're not afraid of free speech and they're not afraid to stand up for what they believe in. And I think that's what's happened in Australia is, and it's kind of happened in a lot of other countries around the world, is that we've lost value in kind of what we had.
I think the problem with Australia, more than in Canada, probably very New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, those three countries are very similar in many ways, is the political correctness.
Yeah.
Other countries don't care about that political correctness. They say what they think.
Yep.
And if something isn't right morally, then it's not right, and they call it out for what it is. Whereas in Australia, we have been so massaged and so, I guess, brainwashed into, as soon as the government dictates that something is the way that it should be, then no other alternative way. You cannot have an alternative point of view. They did the same thing with gay marriage, for example, and it's not to say, I'm not giving my opinion of view on it, but it was as soon as that was legalized, you couldn't disagree with it anymore because you're now anti-government.
Yeah.
And so virtually what they're doing is the indoctrination starts from the state.
Yeah.
And this is what I think a lot of our conversation is going to go back to, is the state, in terms of how they, how they really, really brainwash and massage people into thinking what they want them to think. And it's almost now that it's gotten to the point that your children actually respect the school more, which is the state, than they do their own family unit.
Yeah, and that's if we break down to kind of what's happening, it's they're trying to destroy the family unit.
Yeah. From
a health perspective, from morals, from everything, it's destroy the family unit. The state is now your daddy.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's what's happened, and it's very easy to see once you see it.
Yes.
And everybody has that particular moment where something just doesn't add up.
Triggers them.
And then you're like, holy shit, everything's a lie. And it's a very interesting place because people are like, well, why do you speak up about these things? Why do you do it? It's like, you kind of can't not. You see a car, you're in a car with your friends and you're about to drive off a cliff and you're in the back seat and no one else sees it. Do you just be like, do?
Yeah.
You're like, hey, you might firstly be a little bit quiet, but as it gets closer to the cliff, you've got to say, like, you're going to do whatever you can.
Yeah.
And if everyone still drives, you're going to jump out of the bloody car. You're going to stay with them. And so I've definitely seen a lot of that in Australia. And I was really surprised because one of the things that you find is that Aussies all know that every politician is corrupt. But people are like, they're like, everyone knows, they're all corrupt. But then it's like, we trust them. And I'm not saying all politicians. There's actually some that I really like and really respect. But most people know that the politics are trying to screw them over. And the politicians are trying to screw them over. But they'll still go and vote for that same party that they've always... And, because I was in IMOP, which is now the Heart Party. And it was such a massive eye-opener to me that after being in that, I was like, oh, wow, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Because I was having conversations with people. They're like, oh, well, I vote for Labor or Liberal because my parents voted for Labor or Liberal. And it's like, what do you mean? And it's like for people, I go for this footy team because my parents go for this footy team. And I get it, but like, do you actually research and look into it and see, has that political party or the way it used to be completely changed and been corrupted, or does it still have the same values that your parents believed in or that you believe in now? And most of the time people don't question. And that's, I knew then it was going to get a lot worse and it got better.
Yeah.
And that's when I actually kind of stepped back from being more on the political front and more on trying to change the world and go, I'm just going to get super healthy and just ride this out. Because people are going to do what they're going to do and you can't change people. And I'm just going to be an example of health and wellness and just do my thing. And because that's where my passion lies. And I kind of went back to that because, if you be that example of health and you can weather many storms. Like, people say that I'm a conspiracy theorist or a nutter or what, like, I'm just like, cool, whatever. Like, I'm not phased whatsoever. And I can have conversations, and this is one of my favorite things to do and it's not in an aggressive way, but it's like if someone says something that I disagree with, I'll say, oh, no, I disagree with that. Mm-hmm. And most people are kind of shocked because you see a lot of people play into people's stories. And this specifically around health, if somebody is in a destructive pattern. So, for example, you see people in relationships and all men are assholes and all, their friends like, yeah, they're all assholes. It's like, well, that's not true. You just are choosing a certain type of douchebag, or you're the one who's repeating this pattern. And what are you going to do to change that pattern? Or are you just going to keep going down that path? And what happens is you surround yourself with people that agree with your story, but that story, if it's not serving you, like the story of Australia of, she'll be right, mate, that doesn't serve us anymore because the politicians aren't going to save us. No one's going to come and save us. We have to stand up for what we believe in and what we believe our individual rights are, our country rights are, whatever it is, what we believe in, and we change it. And people forget how powerful they actually are.
Yeah.
So I want to go into, you found out that there was a lot of bullshit happening. You started speaking and standing up. Then what happened?
And then I got targeted, obviously, for speaking my truth and for exposing the corruption and for creating mass awareness. And South Australia, which is where I am originally from, people were really asleep and compliant there. People really trusted the government, and especially the younger people, hard to get through. Anyone my age or below, it was, very few people that were speaking out. So as a result, I obviously got a lot of traction through that. And then pretty much I decided to continue living my life because I found that the last year, all the research and everything that I realized that the last 30 years of my life had been a lie, it got very exhausting, and it can really be very, very taxing on your health and your well-being. So I decided I want to keep living my life in terms of however I can do that. And so I decided to go on a holiday.
Interstate.
Oh,
so you crossed that imaginary line.
I crossed the imaginary line.
Illegally.
Well, no, I didn't do that. So at the time there was no hard border closures when I crossed into Northern Territory from South Australia.
Yeah.
And it was crazy to think that we were really segregated and divided, because that's what obviously Australian politicians did, is they turned a united nation country into separate countries that were almost like had their own laws and directions, which were not laws. So upon entering into Northern Territory, at that point in time, it was fine. But it was when we were returning back to South Australia, that's when things got heated and quite interesting.
Yeah.
And so literally the day that we were, still remember, it was 23rd of November 2021, the day that we were crossing back to South Australia. And funnily enough, you already crossed into South Australia and you'd been driving for 2 hours, but you only then were dictated whether you could continue proceeding to your location or not. So technically speaking, we were already in the state, but we were denied entry because of our medical choice. And so
which went against the state.
And the state at that point in time was represented by the police.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to see police who have no medical background, no idea about, no education or qualification about assessing anyone's health.
Yeah. And
they were actually enforcing all of these so-called directions and all of these unlawful implications on people. There was a massive yellow sign as we entered into South Australia saying unvaccinated residents, no entry.
Wow.
And then on the other side, you had a look at the police vehicles and it said keeping SA safe.
Yeah.
And the contrast was just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yes, there wasn't a lot of people travelling South Australia at the time, travelling out of South Australia at the time, but there were actually quite a lot of overseas travellers coming into the state.
Yeah.
So vaccinated overseas travellers were allowed entry.
Yep.
But unvaccinated local residents were denied entry.
Very, very interesting.
So we were stuck in this pickle of what do we do?
Yeah.
And after back and forth with the police for about a good 3 or 4 hours, and another person who had done the same as what we did, they'd already been turned back to drive to the Northern Territory border, only to be told in Northern Territory they had a hard border closure to all non-NT residents and sent back. So this poor individual had already driven back and forth 3 times, and that proved a point that we were now stuck in no man's land. So the police had to make a decision about allowing us entry on compassionate grounds, and the fun pretty much started from there on in.
Okay, so they let you back in?
So we got entry into South Australia.
Yep.
We got back to...
Even though you're already in South Australia?
Yep, yeah. Exactly.
And even though you're a resident of Australia, not, you're a citizen of Australia, yeah?
Yeah, and a resident of South Australia, exactly. Yeah. So upon arriving back into South Australia, they pretty much put us under indefinite home arrest. So it started with 7 days. And that was the official written direction that we got. Yep. And then the ballpark just kept changing. So got extended to 14 days, but that wasn't provided to us in any formal way. And then from there on end, it was because we refused to undertake any medical procedures, including COVID tests, vaccinations, you name it. We were virtually treated like prisoners in our own home. And South Australian Police, I believe that they used all of their COVID compliance team on us because there weren't many people who were firstly travelling who were unvaccinated, and secondly people who were refusing to comply with those directions.
Yep.
People were so scared, having police come to your house every second day at least is enough to make anyone compliant, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it wasn't too bad around here.
Yes.
Purely, I think, because Queensland's a pretty big state. There's not that many police around.
Yes.
And, like where I live, it's acreages and acreages and acreages.
Yes.
And Gympie didn't even go into lockdown.
Yes, that's great.
And because it's too big an area, I think, for them to even try to enforce. And I don't know why that didn't really go into lockdown. But I kind of noticed that the more centralized areas, that's where they tried to enforce it a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the benefits is they didn't have enough police to kind of go in. And they kind of brought the military in a little bit to do some road closure things, but they didn't really try to bring the military in to enforce, which I'm sure they were wanting to probably. So you've got police coming to your door every second day.
Sometimes 3 times a day.
Yeah. And they're
coming to my workplace.
Yeah.
And even they went to such great lengths as to go to my Christmas party to check up on me to make sure I was attending. Just call cards.
Yeah.
And so this is, up until then, I didn't really understand the true concept of police state.
Yeah.
But South Australia and I think Victoria had it even much worse than we did. But SA was more compliant than Victoria, I think. Yeah. SA really was a police state. And I think in Queensland they tried to implement it, but like you said, people didn't comply as much because people here seem to beat their own drum. You've got a lot of people who have their own local businesses, they work on the land and all of those sorts of things that don't exist as much or as effectively in South Australia. So got that real taste of real, you really could compare it at the time. I remember Mum and I were writing back emails to the South Australian Police, actually educating them about what happened during World War II and saying that they're actually also going to be liable for the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah,
they're going to be individually liable, exactly, just because they're following an instruction and they're not the ones who are at the top of that food chain. Makes no difference to what they're doing. It's actually worse, if anything, because they're the ones that have the opportunity to stop enforcing that. So, yeah, lots of interesting back and forth exchanges via email with the police, which I think probably brought more limelight onto our situation.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, that's really when, lucky, my mum and I, we had each other because it would be a lot harder doing it on your own. But that's when we realised that there's no way we're going to comply.
Yeah.
Like, compliance is absolutely not a choice.
Yeah.
For us because of what they were doing. So we did it peacefully. There was no, no violence or aggression or anything like that. But it was a time of we really didn't know were we going to be in home arrest for weeks, months? How long was it going to be?
And do you think it was irresponsible as someone who was healthy, breathing, just living your life, being a healthy person and trusting your own immune system and trusting your body? Do you think it was irresponsible doing that rather than trusting Pfizer, who have the largest felony claim in the world, in US history, and has been fined for bribing doctors, manipulating data, forcing vaccinations and medical procedures on people, and has been found to be lying multiple times and hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, don't you think you should trust someone like Pfizer more than your own body?
A good question.
Like, they seem legit,
Trust
right?
Science.
Yeah, trust
the thing
science.
is, the science wasn't adding up either.
Because that's the thing. It's no secret that doTerra has had a huge positive impact on my life, specifically around my mental health and my immune system. I've been doing this business now for 10 years and I can ship these products to anyone, anywhere in the world within 7 days. So if you're needing a good night's sleep, reducing your stress, if you're feeling anxious, overwhelmed, need some immune support, digestive support, metabolic health support, pretty much anything I can think of, these oils and doTerra product range can support you. Now, I created a landing page. It's thathealthdude.com/doTerra, or you can also reach out to me in their DMs and I can make a custom package specifically for your needs. There's two ways. Either become a customer, that's 90% of my business, or if you've got a wellness brand and a business, you can use doTerra and me, the perks are you get me, as a fulfillment partner to really support and enhance the vitality of your customer base. Just go to thathealthdude.com/doTerra or send me a message in any of my social platforms in a DM.
The science was actually telling us to do everything other than what the pharmaceutical company was teaching us to do, because all the natural things that anyone knows, basic. Like, let's go to complete basics. So getting vitamin D and sunshine.
Getting fresh air.
Being able to breathe fresh oxygen.
Yeah.
So, being able to socialize with people for your mental health. Those three things were just fully stripped away from us.
And that's the thing. It's laughable now, but I know how much pain you and others and even myself went through to try to stand up for breathing.
Yes.
Like, when your breathing is restricted, that is, you put your body into signs of distress. Like, it's simple.
Exactly.
And, these type of things just blew my mind that, as you said, people were so compliant on them. And I can understand from a police state, because people are indoctrinated into, the police state. The government is your daddy and you need to listen to them. And I'm the same as you. I don't really want to go out and break laws, but they weren't laws. And this is the thing. Once you start to realize that everything they did was not legal, pretty much, they just kind of were making things up and saying, hey, you should do this. And you're like, under why? This is not a law.
Yeah. And
going out and enforcing it if it was a law. And there's a lot of these police and, you're starting to see things happen now to these people. And, because what they did was not only unjust, it was actually unlawful a lot of the time.
Yeah, criminal, I guess you could say in some way. And that's the thing that really alarmed me, because up until then, I've never really had a passion for reading statutes and laws and
I couldn't think of anything
dissecting legislation. but I was forced to do that because of my personal circumstance. And so when I read this, because in South Australia, unlike, for example, Queensland, and I think Victoria as well, all of our directions came under the emergency management. So they deemed South Australia a state of emergency in March 2022. And then unlawfully through that, they granted all of these directions. And so the powers that South Australia Police had were unlimited. They could enter into your home. They could break through your door. They could handcuff you. They could assault you. So they stripped away all fundamental human rights, constitutional rights, basic principles. And that's what then it became quite scary, because we had police who actually jumped over a 2.5 metre fence and knock on all the bedroom windows and say that they had the powers under the emergency management to do anything that they wished. And so we questioned them on that and said, well, okay, in that instance, if I was a police officer, armed, in uniform, and I came to your doorstep, how would that make you feel, knowing that I have a gun? Would that make you feel safe? Jumping over your fence and telling you what you're telling me? I don't know if the penny dropped, but I think any sane person would see that the South Australian Police there was absolutely no duty of safety for the welfare of the South Australian citizens. It was nothing to do about your safety. It definitely wasn't anything to do with your health, but it was definitely a lot to do with doing the opposite to you and putting your safety at risk and putting you in a state of heightened fear. And that's what people do. When they fear, they comply.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the whole thing is people, it's one of the things that a lot of people do is they fear taking risk in life. They fear doing things. So they live a very kind of life of, they have a lot of regrets from. And you see a lot of people on their deathbed. It's like, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have followed my heart or listened to my passion or listened to my soul, and they don't because, well, my dad or my mum told me to take this career, or my school counsellor said do this, or society pushed me in this direction. And, as someone who's a health professional, you see people's physical bodies, how unwell they are purely because they're not listening to their truth, and they're living somebody else's life, whether that be like daddy government or with a daddy police state, whatever it is, they're not being true to themselves. And then this is why we see so much disease in the world and so much suffering. It's because people they're not connected to their own body. And when you're in that state of fear, that, as you said, it's a lot easier to control people.
Yes.
And it was quite interesting seeing that it's almost like some of us were just immune to it. Straight away, we're like, this is just propaganda.
Yeah.
This is literally all the propaganda. We taught about it in history, and I say history loosely because I don't really, it's like his story. And that's the thing. I can't remember what it was. I really liked the kind of TV shows that are about castles and things like that. Like I've always just liked that type of stuff. And then there was one king in whatever it was, and there was the main character that was the main fighter that was doing a lot of stuff. And he's like, I'm just not going to write you in the history books. And so he was the one who was writing the history. So that was the history that was going to get passed on because that's what it was written as. And you see that with so many things that it's written down. Oh, it must be truth. That must have happened. And a lot of the time we weren't there. So we don't know if that happened. And this kind of leads us down this path of just kind of this kind of mass compliance of not questioning, like, Pfizer just does this, and it's this miraculous, well, you're just going to have 2 boosters or 2 shots. But not even like looking at the fact that they've done this type of thing before and they've been fined for this before, and they're just doing the exact same marketing campaign again, but it's now on a mass scale, and you just have to comply. And that type of stuff it just blows my mind, and it just makes me so intrigued at how we got to that place. And it's kind of like you said with the mass indoctrination from a young age. I don't know. I feel like I just went on a tangent there, and I'm just being just so interested in the way the human mind works and the way history and the way we can be manipulated so easily. So anyways, let's keep moving. What else happened after that?
So I completed my direction of being in home isolation for 7 days, which was the only formal direction instructed to me and my mum. And everything that came after that was, well, it was unlawful to begin with, but it was never given to us in any formal communication, written communication. So I felt like, where was it going to end? You know, how long we're going to be stuck in this situation. It was already November 2021. Christmas was around the corner. I had already had to take extended time off work. The government wasn't financing our living situation.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is you've got to comply, and this is how you got to live. But if you can't pay your rent or you can't afford food, that's your own fault.
Exactly. You know, it was so inhumane, even to the point of, I have dogs. Who's going to walk the dogs? Well, that's your problem.
Yeah.
Who's going to get your groceries? Well, that's your problem.
Yeah.
So I got to a point where I was like, enough is enough. I'm going to leave my home to find out what my rights are in terms of testing, because at the time they had I wasn't aware if they had the RAT tests or the PCR tests. I knew they had the PCR tests, but South Australia, funnily enough, was one of the only states that made it unlawful for people to purchase RAT tests. So I was forced, I guess, to go and find out what my rights were. Little did I know when I left my home that day to go on that expedition that the police had already left call cards to all the neighbours around the neighbourhood to let them know that if they had seen a car with this registration or the girl living in that home, leaving her home, to call the police.
They'll be in. Yeah.
And it's exactly what happened during World War II, you know, dobbing in your neighbours.
Yeah.
I was only probably about 400 metres, 500 metres from my home when I got arrested. So
someone was literally at the window, you know, waiting for you to...
Yes. And to be honest, many people question, why would you do that? You know, you were already being surveillanced. That's so stupid. Why would you have left your home? Well, firstly, I needed to find out what my rights were. And secondly, how much longer was I going to be putting up with this situation? And
it was only 2 weeks to flatten the curve, remember?
Exactly.
They didn't extend that at all. It was just 2 weeks and that was it. We were done and dusted.
That's right. So I knew that, funnily enough, there were 3 reasons on what basis you could leave your home. One of them was to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Another was to get tested. Yeah. And the third was if you were in an emergency.
Yeah.
So I left my home for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And I believe the situation we were put in was an emergency situation as well. It's called the Emergency Management Act after all, that we were held in a indefinite home arrest for. So on the day that I got arrested, there was 5 police officers surrounding my car. All of them were men, funnily enough. I had quite a lengthy exchange with them because I still couldn't understand on what basis I was being arrested. And it didn't take very long for me to find out and understand on what basis can the police arrest you for, because I knew that you can get pulled over for a traffic offence.
Yep.
You can also get pulled over for assisting someone with a major indictable offence. But these questions weren't being answered because when I asked the police, they couldn't give me any questions. They were just repeating the same thing. You breached the emergency management directions. You breached the emergency management directions. Well, as far as I understand, a direction isn't law, and prove that what I was doing was unlawful. They couldn't prove it.
Yeah.
And so I was arrested, and I was taken into custody with no evidence.
Yeah.
Completely no evidence. Everything was completely fabricated, and it was based on a particular police officer's or several police officers' personal opinion.
Yeah.
You know, their view of a subjective situation or an opinion they had on, you know, for example, an anti-vaxxer, a derogatory term that obviously was used against people who refused to partake in a medical experience, who questioned the narrative. And so I was taken into the City Watch House, which up until then I had no idea what that even was, and denied an interview. And I was booked in to have a hearing the next day to plead whatever allegations I had put against me. At this point in time, I still didn't understand what law I had broken.
Yeah.
What were the claims that were made against me, and they purposely put you in the dark and deny you the knowledge of knowing what that is, so that you're unprepared, obviously, for the hearing. Obviously, over the last few years, I've gained a lot of knowledge, and had I had my time now, I would have definitely done things differently. There's a lot of things that you can do when you are in that sort of situation. Again, that comes back to non-compliance peacefully. Yeah. Things like don't sign any document. And even though the documents I had signed, I said that they were done under duress, it's best to just not sign anything, because you're not acknowledging any of their unlawful and criminal actions.
Yeah.
Also, things like using a solicitor. They're not going to act in your best interest. Very, very rarely are you going to be able to find someone who's going to represent you, especially when it's a political I was a political prisoner through this whole situation. But when it's such a political event, they're going to firstly think about how do they protect themselves and how is it going to be reflected on their firm
reputation. Yeah.
So obviously at that point in time, it was really in the midst of, in the heat of COVID. All the mandates were coming into place around exactly that time, November, December 2021. And so anyone who was against the narrative was shunned and seen as an anti-vaxxer, despite the fact that they may have had childhood vaccines when they were young and not known those, you know, the
it's just this one vaccine that you haven't had. Now you're an anti-vaxxer.
Exactly.
Because you chose not to participate in this one medical experiment, which has just been rushed through by a convicted felon, you're now an anti-vaxxer.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. And then I always laugh. It's like, okay, so once you've had your 2 and you don't have your booster, are you now an anti-vaxxer still? And the thing that was really fascinating for me was I knew that how many vaccines that they'd bought, the Australian government. I think it was at least 8 per person that they'd bought. Yeah. So when they were saying, oh, it's only going to be 2, I knew that was a lie because they bought enough for 8 per person. So then they brought out the booster. Then they brought out, I don't know, what it was called, booster top-up. Well, it's almost like an iPhone. Oh, the new one's out. Yeah. And so I just knew that was going to happen. And so people, again, through lack of knowledge, and it's not that, people who are not in the health field may not do this type of research, so it's not their fault, but they thought if I just have my 2, it'll be over and done, or I'll just do my 2 weeks of lockdown, it'll be over and done. So I can understand why people looked at people like you, people like me as crazies, because, come on, it's just 2 weeks, it's just 2 shots. But we knew that was bullshit. And we knew that every time that you give the government or pharmaceuticals more power, that's just like that next boundary that they're going to push.
That's exactly, So once you compromise yourself once, you're going to have to continue compromising yourself more. And that's the thing that I also found with a lot of these people who lost their jobs due to the unlawful mandates was they had the 2 shots. They had to have the booster to keep their shot, to keep their job. And they had already, some of them being injured after the first or the second. And by the third, they were like, absolutely totally against it.
Yeah.
They were so
they became anti-vaxxers after
yeah, exactly. But they still lost their jobs. So now they've lost their job plus they're injured. So what have they gained, really?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I realised when everything happened to me, because a lot of people exactly said, like you did, well, just go get the PCR test. Who cares? Just do it. And I knew that if I compromised my beliefs and my values and compromised my health, that where is it going to stop? And it's not actually going to get me out of this situation in any way, shape or form. I don't know. Had I complied, which was never an option for me, would my circumstance have changed? I don't know.
Or
you just don't know what do they have planned next. So on the next day I was listed for a hearing. I was terribly misrepresented by my solicitor, who had absolutely no defence other than the fact that I was a 30-year-old woman. No other defence. And not the fact that, so many things that she could have said. No criminal history. She could have said, where is the evidence? There's absolutely no evidence prove that this girl has any signs of infectious disease. Didn't question that. Prove what reasonable excuse she didn't have to leave her home, because, again, when I looked into the details of the legislation, everything came down to this one word or two words: reasonable excuse. So, and that's the thing that until you start studying the law, you don't realise that everything is in the detail. There's no common sense behind the madness, and there's no justice. So forget about justice and exercising your rights for justice, even though that's in an ideal world what we want to do. You're actually guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty, which is what the legislation says it is. But it's a complete fraud, a system built on criminalized corruption and legalized corruption. And so that day I was deemed to have put the whole state of South Australia at risk and sent to the Adelaide Women's Prison with an indefinite term. And so that's when I guess I lost I completely lost all of my rights, because when you're in that situation, you're in custody, it's very hard to represent yourself when you're in jail. And if you don't have anyone fighting for you on the other end, which I saw happen to a lot of people who were around me, they're stuck in and out. And like I said, a lawyer really isn't going to act in your best interest, especially a lawyer of the state, which is what some people can only afford. So, that's pretty much my fight for justice began from there on.
So it's crazy. You think in Australia that political prisoners are not a thing. And ultimately that's what it is, because you decided to go against a political decision that was funded pretty much by Big Pharma.
And taxpayer
dollars. And that's, we paid to pretty much almost mass genocide, our country and future generations, because we're now seeing, and this was the hardest part for me, is I knew, all this stuff was happening, but I also knew from just the basic research that there's going to be major implications on a society global level. If you go and just force vaccinate 90% of the population, this is what they claim that they got, and you get it wrong, that's going to be pretty gnarly. And you could say that they got it wrong or they got it right, depending on if you think that they're good or bad, or if they had other agendas. But that 10% control group is very, very important for any experiment. And I prefer to be in the control group that doesn't get the vaccine, because I want to do my part for science, because I think it's very important. And this is the thing that people don't seem to understand is if everybody had it, you don't have that control group.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not the way science really works.
Mm.
And we, as I said, we are seeing the results now of what happened with that. And we kind of, like, I intuitively knew deep in my heart that this was going to have some dire consequences.
Mm.
And that's why I stood up for what I believed in. And I didn't go to jail. And I'm very glad. I may have, like, if I was put in situations, but I think if I would have been in Victoria or New South Wales or Adelaide, I probably would have, because I just kept on living my life. I was one of those people that by breathing and being healthy was putting everybody at risk. By getting sunlight, by breathing fresh air, moving my body, eating good food, doing all the self-care regime, and not having any symptoms whatsoever of disease or illness. It's the invisible enemy.
Yeah, the boogeyman.
Ooh, yeah. You're healthy, but I'm scared. So because I'm scared, you have to do what I do.
Yeah.
And that's it's absolute insanity.
Yeah.
When you think about that. Like,
yeah,
I'm overweight, so now you have to be overweight. It's mental.
Yes. Yes. That what they did very effectively is the problem, reaction, solution, and you only need 3 months to brainwash someone.
Mm.
And so when everyone is locked down, questioning and fearing their life, and all they have is a TV in front of them, doesn't take a long time to create that reaction, because you already have a problem, and then to very quickly come up with a solution overnight. Yeah, which was max vaccination.
And I think as well the challenge is that most people are good people, and they did want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And what I did and what you did was because we believed we were doing the right thing. I believe that by not putting, as I said, the largest payer of a fine for felonies injection into my body, I believe that I did what was the best to keep everybody safe. And by taking responsibility for my own health and looking after myself and not trusting an experiment, I believe that was the best decision for everybody's health. And when that choice is taken away, now your body is now owned by the state and you cannot do what you want with your body, then what else, as I said, what else do we have left?
Yeah, how low can you go? And that's the absolute lowest that people went, to take away their freedom of speech and their bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were the two things that I was never willing to give away. And obviously as a result of that, I was punished.
Yeah. And so how long were you in there for?
So initially it was indefinite. I had a listed court hearing 2 weeks from the day that I was in custody, and we appealed. So I was denied bail. The first time I was denied bail.
So were you in like a comfy hotel room for 2 weeks, or how was it? What is it?
No, I would say it probably comfy hotel would be the best case scenario.
Yeah.
No, it was in full isolation, highest level isolation prison. And I was on my own because obviously, remember, at that point in time, I was for the whole state of South Australia at risk. So I was considered extremely dangerous. Yeah. And so I was in a little cell on my own.
Did this cell have like air moving through it so that...
No air moving through it. No open windows.
Yeah.
And that was part of the punishment, was I wasn't allowed to go outside until I got vaccinated.
Yeah.
So every single day the nurses came around and they offered me a test, a vaccination, antidepressants, sleeping pills, you name it. Any big pharma drug you want, you can have it. And everyone around me I was seeing giving in and accepting this.
Yeah.
And that was really disturbing to see that, but because they were really hanging a loose carrot in front of you and saying, I literally had a nurse say to me, you're never going to see the sunlight unless you get vaccinated and get tested. And I said, well, that's not an option for me. Don't come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
By sort of the third day, they just went, oh, this girl's not going to accept what we want. But there was definitely a real feeling of fear inside me when I arrived to that prison was, are they going to force vaccinate people? Because you don't really have any rights. So that was quite an probably one of the most unpleasant experiences that I had, was having that feeling stripped away from you, thinking that you had no rights. And what they tried to do is, for anyone who was unvaccinated, they tried to put them under a mental health ward. So in order for me to then get any assistance or counselling, because they had counsellors, was that I had to be put under this, I guess, mentally insane, unvaccinated treatment. Even so far to the extent that, so any normal person in custody, don't like to use the word prisoner because half of them are there for unjust reasons, they have the option to have visitors. Obviously, COVID was supposedly heightened at that point in time because everyone was getting vaccinated, and obviously everyone's getting sick from that.
Coincidence, eh?
But it was apparently COVID that was killing everyone. So they weren't allowing any visitors in person, but you could Zoom.
Yeah.
But for me, because I was unvaccinated, I was denied that opportunity as well, because the virus can travel through the computer as well.
It's very dangerous that it can go through the computer. But as long as you're sitting down and you've got a drink in your hand,
you're fine.
It's fine. Yeah. Okay, so you're not allowed Zoom. You're fully isolated, and that is a real fear, because I've seen I think it was in America, where some military members were forcibly held down and vaccinated. And that was a real, that crossed my mind as well. Okay, so what's going to happen? How am I going to be if they come at me with that? Like, what would my reactions as a man be? And it was a very interesting thought pattern that I was had. It's like, okay, am I defending myself against someone trying to kill me? Because, my beliefs are so strong around putting poison in my body.
Well, that's what I said to one of the nurses when she said, well, I don't understand why you just don't want to get the test. It's just a PCR test. I'm only going to put this swab up your nose and it's only going to take 2 seconds. And I said, allowing you to do that to me is equivalent to rape.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't consent.
Yeah.
I'm not consenting to you raping me through that method. And she went, oh my God, I'm not coming back to her tomorrow.
But that's the thing is, like, when somebody forcefully does something to your body, and whether it's your mental, like whatever, they're forcing something on you, and rape's a big word, but that's ultimately what it is, because you've lost your control of your own body against your own will.
That's right. And a lot of people who got vaccinated due to having to keep their jobs or whatever reason it was.
Keep a roof over your head so you can feed your family.
They didn't actually consent to it. They were forced to sign over fear.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I would say at least one out of 2 people that you speak to who got it, they said that they actually didn't agree with it and that they were coerced. So never ever, the first thing that medical practitioners' oath that they make is to do no harm. Yeah. And so it has to be fully consensual, and any patient has to agree fully, not under duress, not under coercion, to undertake whatever medical procedure that they are choosing to undertake. And obviously that wasn't happening. And so all of these medical professionals, GPs, they were fully bought out by these pharmaceutical industries. And I really think that the next step of what we should be doing, and I know that there are some things happening in the background, is we need to be going after these individuals. Every single GP who allowed this genocide to happen, 95% of them knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of them actually vaccinated people, but themselves took the saline shot. I know a lot of GPs that did that. That's, they need to be held liable for that crime that they've committed, because they did it because they wanted to keep a roof over their head. They wanted to keep their registration as a medical practitioner, and they wanted to keep making money.
Yeah.
That was a great opportunity. I know a lot of organizations in the medical industry who cashed out a lot.
Yeah. Lighthouse is my signature 6 or 12-month one-on-one mentorship program. It's pretty much where I've gathered all my life experience as studying with the Czech Institute for 15 years, my intuitive gifts, my personal challenges, which I do not wish upon anybody, and to fast track you to where you want to go. And my approach is very simple. One, it's all about vitality and life force. Change takes a truck ton of energy. So you need that vitality and life force to ground you so that you're resilient when blockages come up, and they will. Two, we've got to get you clear, get that clarity on where you're going, because once you've got that little bit of life force back, you can start to dream bigger, that biggest vision for your life. And then three, it's all about confidence. Now, as a lighthouse, you may have weathered many a storm. You may feel battered, you may feel broken, you may feel defeated. But as we rebuild your confidence, you start to shine bright, and it helps to guide others home because they see that beacon of hope, that brightness of you sharing your truth, sharing the essence of who you are. And the truth is, the world really needs a lot of lighthouses right now because people are stuck, people are overwhelmed, and we need your brilliance, that light within inside you, to be shining so bright that people can spot you from a bloody mile away. Now, all you got to do is head on over to thathealthdude.com/lighthouse or send me a DM on any of my socials and we can chat and see if it works. I take on a few clients every year and let's see if we can make some magic happen. Yeah, and that's the thing is when you understand basic business models.
Yeah.
Like the medical business model is not to keep people healthy, because if everyone's healthy, you don't need the medical business model. You don't need to go to hospital. You don't need to go to your doctor. You don't need your pharmaceuticals every day to keep you alive. You don't need them. If you're healthy, that you don't participate. It's like I choose not to go to that shop because I don't buy that stuff. It's the same thing. It's a business.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got a hospital with beds, you need those beds full. You don't want those beds empty because it's a cash cow.
That's right.
And this is where when you trace it all back, it's had nothing to do with health. This had nothing to do with keeping grandma safe or whatever. We're all in this together. Whatever the bloody propaganda terms were.
Slogans.
Yeah, the slogans. That's what they were. It had nothing to do with that. It purely had to do with money, but behind that money, I think, was something a lot more sinister.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I can choose to participate in one business or another business. I chose not to give Pfizer shareholders my body. I just chose that. And whatever the other companies were, Johnson & Johnson and the rest of it. I just chose not to give them my body. And I didn't want them to make money from it. And, that's fair enough. But the sinister stuff behind it, that's where I feel like on a soul level, my body knew if I don't, it's like that kind of saying, well, someone else will stand up. I could have just, I didn't really need to stand up. I had enough income. I was, doing my own thing. I could have just been quiet. It cost me money. There's stress on past relationships and friendships lost and all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I could have not done anything. I could have just peacefully lived my life. But believe it or not, somewhere in my soul, I'm not a coward as a man. And the one thing that I saw a lot of men doing were being cowards. And I think a lot of men now know that they were cowards because I found a lot more women were standing up for the rights of the next generation and for humanity, and men were just being cowards. And it was really quite interesting to be like, what? Where are the men? Where are the men in the country? Where's that Anzac spirit gone to stand up for what's right? And I couldn't believe that it was just gone. And obviously my friendship circle and the people I know that I'm close with, they all stood up in whatever way they did, whether that be, crossing borders when they shouldn't have, whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
They just did it because they knew I'm not participating in this nonsense.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play this game because daddy government doesn't own me.
Mm-hmm.
It never has owned me. It never will own me. And definitely not daddy pharmaceutical company. They don't own me. And you can be called, as I said, a conspiracy theorist, a tinfoil hatter, a anti-vaxxer. Like, when you research the vaccine, it's like the biggest compliment ever. Of course, yeah. I don't do that. I don't. Well, yes, thank you for that compliment. It's not, derogatory. And the thing is when you start to get these, they're memes. That's what they are. They're stories. Once you start getting that anyone who opposes this one particular thing is now an anti-vaxxer, you can tell that is a manipulated story. Yeah, that goes across the entire globe.
Intelligent as well, like to use that type of terminology. I just using my brain.
Yeah.
It's just questioning the narrative. That's what it is. But that's the thing that unfortunately Australians are very basic in many ways, and that COVID really showed that. The people are so basic that so long as they have beer in their hand and they're watching the football, and they can still go travelling,
they can go to the concert. Their
life is complete. So all it took was to mandate those and target those things, and people were running to get it done.
Yeah.
Whereas in other countries, they are not going to, in other countries, they weren't doing it for free, as in the vaccinations you had to pay for. And, people were just, because they knew that there's no way that anyone was going to accept it.
Yeah. And a lot of other countries as well that have had war or dictatorships or communism or specific communities targeted by things, they're like, oh, we're playing this game again, are we? They're like, nah.
No.
My parents told me about this nonsense, or my grandparents told me about this nonsense.
Exactly.
But it was very interesting to see Aussies just kind of bend over and take it.
Yes.
And specifically the men.
Yes.
And it was quite sad. And, like coward's a pretty big word to call men. But there was a lot of men out there that were cowards and still are cowards. And because a lot of people think, it's just going to go back to normal now. It's like normal's gone. Yeah. What was normal was mental anyway, but we live in a different world now. There's pivotal moments in history that change everything, and that was one of them. And you can look at any war, or there's sides, and then there were sides, and that's the unfortunate thing is I wasn't allowed to go to the pub or the cafe or the whatever, and I was criticized for being a person that had different values. So there was unfortunately the sides was a big thing.
It was a whole divide and conquer game. That was the underlying intention behind all of this. How do we divide and conquer people, to the point where you and your neighbor now hate each other because of a political narrative. And I think people from both sides got bought into it, because obviously we also seen people who chose not to get the medical experiment, because maybe like calling it a vaccine, they became fearful of the people who were, because of the fact that they were shedding and things like that. So they were really trying to divide us in every way, shape and form. And at the end of the day, we sort of have to come back down to basics and go, we are all human.
Back to team humanity.
Yeah. And what is the humane thing to do? There's only so much you can do in terms of trying to educate someone. But I realised by sort of mid-2020 that most people had already made up their mind about whether they were going to get it or not. And there was no way to save them. And unfortunately, those people whose lives you were going to try and save, they were the ones that were going to unfortunately go against you in the end. So, and I experienced a lot of that through friendships and work experiences as well, which was very, really, really disappointing to see in people. I think that was the hardest thing, because like you said, there's only really, the government's less than 1% of Australia, and it was up to us, up to the majority of humanity to actually to drive this agenda. And they were very successful. People were very successful in driving it.
They were definitely very successful with the division, and both sides thought they were doing the right thing. I'm doing what's best for saving grandma and all that. And that division is what was such a big thing. And for me, what I realized was that free choice was my most important thing. You want to get that in your body, go for it. Get it done. I'm going to have my free choice and tell you I don't think it's a good idea. Just like if you were drinking a bottle of vodka every night, I might be saying, like, hey, mate, you've got a bit of a drinking problem. Like, I think you want to go still drink that. I'm not going to take the bottle off your hand. Maybe I might. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's the thing is free choice is the thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I realized. And I know it's very interesting. Like, I don't know anyone that hasn't taken it that regrets their decision.
Yeah.
But I do know lots of people that have taken it that regret their decision, and a lot of people that were saying I was uninformed. And as someone who is in health, I'd now kind of see it as my duty responsibility to help people get their health back, because that's my passion. Whether you've done this or you've done this, because I was no picture of health back in the day. I got sick. I didn't listen to my body, and I got really sick, and that's what woke me up to my own personal health journey. Before then, I drank, I hung out with shit people. Yeah, I was vaccinated to the high hills. I was doing all these things. And, you know, if I look back on 20, you know, you got it. This is the way I do it, is me now as a 40-year-old man looking back on my 20-year-old self, we did two different people. Would I treat that person with disrespect? Would I treat that person with judgment? Would I treat this person, would I try and educate them, make them, you know, help them to make better choices? Maybe, but this person's living their own life. And that person that was in their 20-year-old made me who I am today. And so everybody that made their choice around health did what they did with the best knowledge that they had. Do I think a lot of men are cowards and they could have stood up more? Yes. But everyone has to live with the decision that they made. And moving forward, I'd love to see us all come back together as team humanity again. And, you know, I quite like what's happening in America, where you can see it's like, make America healthy again. Make Australia healthy again. Like, let's actually thrive as a species again, not have chronic disease, chronic mental health issues. Where, you know, I don't even know what the percentage of Australians are that are on pharmaceuticals right now, but I know it would be scary. And we have lost health so much. And that's the one thing, if we can make the next generation of kids healthier than the generation before, and we can continue that, everything changes. But the statistics are, which a lot of people don't know, is people think, oh, the world's overpopulated. It's like, we are declining at a rapid rate. People can't afford to have kids. People can't have kids on their own because they're so unhealthy. People are so stressed out and overwhelmed. And, you know, the statistics are we live longer. It's like, we don't live longer in a happy space. We're drugged up. We can barely function our body past 50 for most people these days. And that's not living. And that's not, like, if we looked at humanity and truthfully looked at it as like, are we at peak civilization? Is this it? Is this what it is? We consume, we drink our sorrows away, or we take drugs, or we watch porn, or we do all the destructive habits. Is that living?
It's gone backwards.
Yeah, we've gone backwards. And you always hear that saying, oh, back in the day. Yeah, because back in the day, like, I remember growing up as a kid, we were playing, your life was fun, there wasn't as many stresses. Even if you didn't have as much money, you could still afford a roof over your head, you could afford the basics. People now are sleeping in tents and in cars and just struggling to survive. And if we start looking at it as a global problem, that how do we become friends again after we've had a little bit of a tiff, a little bit of an argument? How do we, you know, join forces again as humans? And I think that's the question that's important to ask, is what's happened has happened, okay? You went to prison for your belief system. Someone else had a shot for their belief system. Completely different stories. And how do we learn to get along again? Because there's a lot of hurt from all sides. And, you know, I the biggest thing that I don't like, and, you know, that's just something that I find very fascinating about you, is you haven't gone into victimhood. You know, you stayed in your power. You went through traumatic experiences, but you haven't gone, poor me. You know, I'm the victim. And when we stay in our power, instead of, you know, horrible things happen to you, but you stayed in your power, that is so important than becoming the victim. Because if we all are the victim, and you see it now, everyone's a victim. Oh, it happened to me. I had to do this. I had to do that. We all made choices, and we all have to live with the circumstances. And as adults, that's what we have to do. Is I made decisions, you made decisions, everyone made decisions. Now we live with it. We've done it. Let's move on. And what's the next step? So I'd like to ask you what you believe the next step is, what you think are going to be the challenges that are coming our way, or if there's anything else that you'd like to go deeper into what happened with you, that you learned, like a lesson, a deep lesson and wisdom that you learned through that experience.
Yeah, lots of life lessons that I learned through this experience, which I obviously wouldn't wish upon anyone in that sense, but in another sense, I feel like it impacted me in a way that I would have never experienced had I not gone through this. Things like, what you value, who your real friends are.
Yeah.
So it gave me a lot of clarity around those things, and that was a real positive take out of it. Also understanding the deep level of our judicial system and how corrupt it is, and people not actually even touching on that, in any stage of their life, and just fully believing that everything that they're doing in terms of complying with road rules and everything else is the right thing to do, not actually realizing that so much of it, again, doesn't come down to your safety or anything. It's all purely a money-making scheme. Yep. Because realistically, we learned this through COVID, is that if the government actually cared for you, we wouldn't have homeless people.
No.
And the amount of homelessness has risen exponentially since COVID.
No, if the government cared for you, they would have been dropping organic food at your doorstep.
Exactly.
You have a massage every day. You should be going to the beach, you'd be surfing, there'd be no tax, that's
just simple things like no homelessness.
Yeah.
Very, very simple things that we just can't seem to even be able to achieve in such a wealthy country that we live in. I mean, Australia has a wealth of resources and land like no other country does.
It's mental.
But the other thing that I learned is a really important thing is always standing on your truth, because once you do that, you actually will win in the end. You just have to persevere, and courage is a big thing. And I agree with you. Unfortunately, we saw a lot of men fall and a lot of women have courage, which was quite interesting and disappointing to see in many ways, because, men of my generation were just really, really scared.
Spineless.
Spineless, and cowardly. And I felt like, I couldn't count on any men. Really, the dominating age group in Australia that was leading that courage was your middle-aged women.
Yeah.
Women in their 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah. Your grandparents that were like, fuck it, I've lived a decent life. I'm going to make sure that my grandkids live a decent life, or my kids live a decent life.
Exactly. So I think from that point of view, just understanding that once you know what your true thought is, it's really easy to make the right choices from that.
Yeah.
And not compromising your beliefs or your values. The other thing that I learned as well is that I'd be more than happy to help people with, but also giving people that courage and faith that you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
That you don't have to go through the mainstream way, which is using a lawyer if you are, in a situation where it is unjust.
Yeah.
And to actually execute your own rights. There's more resources than ever before. I mean, when I was going through what I was going through, unfortunately, there was not as many people. There wasn't as much access to resources and individuals, but now there is more than ever before. So, it starts with something really, really simple like a parking fine. Just try and challenge that. And if you can get that right, then you can, move on to if anything ever happens to you, because it's really, really important to know how to exercise your own rights, especially if you have kids or if you have a family. If I hadn't gone through this situation, I probably never would have known myself. But I always, like you as well, I did have a little bit of rebellion, not being born in Australia, and also questioning things to an extent. I always had that in me. I'm not going to be compliant. And for the right reasons, obviously. So the way forward, what do I see from here? I think it's really important as well to not focus on doomsday, because a lot of the freedom movement seem to focus on doomsday and victims mentality, and there's actually no solutions to problems. We keep talking about the same topics, the same issues, but a lot of us are not coming up with any solutions. And the solution actually starts with you. It doesn't start with a global movement or a huge idea. It starts with simple things like just pushing back and changing the way you do things. So from a compliance point of view, it's really important to question people who are in authority, holding them accountable, regardless of what position they're in. If it's a council officer trying to bully you into doing something like, a walking your dog off the lead on a beach, unbelievable that's now seen as a crime. An $800 fine it is now has gone up to. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Well, firstly, this is free land.
Yeah.
The government doesn't own the beaches the last time I checked. And there is no law by sea, which a lot of people don't know. So just questioning those positions of authority, because a lot of the time they are completely ignorant and no one has ever questioned their position or their authority. And once you do, you'll actually find that you will have a lot more power and you'll have a lot more respect, and you're actually able to take control in your own hands when you ask those simple questions. Well, where does your authority come from? Is it underpinned by any actual law or jurisdiction? Turns out it's not. Or if it is, let's break it down to the highest level, which is our constitutional rights. You're stripping my constitutional rights of the freedom to be able to walk.
Yeah. It's mental, eh?
So that's a very simple example to use. But yeah, I think it's really, really important for people to start pushing back, because if more people push back, if more people ask questions, they will never be able to have the power to do any of these things. The only reason that through COVID they tightened up a lot of things and all these laws were passed unlawfully was because people were ignorant. They weren't aware. They rely on people not questioning anything, and they rely on people being pushed back in a corner where they feel like they have no other alternative solutions, which there is always one thing I learned. There's always a solution to any problem.
Yeah.
You just have to go around it, not go the straight road to get there. Yeah, I really encourage people to I guess lawfully rebel in their own way and question these things, because as I mentioned, that all of these systems are built on legalized corruption. And who's legalized it? The question is, who has legalized it? We haven't.
Yeah, and that's I think when you start to understand that you're kind of born into this kind of slave mentality and that you just accepted things as they were, and as you said, sometimes for you it was some type of legal position that you were put in. You're like, wait a minute, this isn't quite right. Isn't the law supposed to lock away bad guys, not good people? And it's when these experiences happen, and this is why I think for a lot of people, if they haven't had that experience, they don't know what it feels like when it comes to that point where you're like, okay, no, this is my boundary and I'm solid on this. And you can push as hard as you want on this, but there is no way that this boundary is coming down. And if you haven't ever had that, it's hard because you can just get shot, mate. Come on, just have it's only 2 weeks. And I think what people don't understand is that, well, it wasn't only 2 weeks. Even though most people massively complied, it wasn't only 2 weeks. It wasn't only 2 shots. Yeah, it was everything that the whole process, there was lies.
Yeah.
There was lies, there was manipulation, and the goalpost kept on moving. And they would just move it, okay, well, let's see if we can push them to here. Okay, a bit of a resistance. But if there was no resistance, I don't know where the world would be right now. It would be, it wouldn't be pretty.
No, I think people, again, going back to focusing on the negatives and not looking at what we can do positively, is there is more people than you realize who are aware or who are on the same page or who are absolutely filthy now that with the government and with the injuries that they've sustained or, you know, the businesses they've lost or whatever it is. So it isn't doomsday. I think that there is definitely, we are going towards creating a better world and a better life, but unfortunately it has to get worse before it gets better. And that's through our own choices that we've made for ourselves. But I think that the best thing that I got out of this was really knowing what I'm not willing to compromise on.
Yeah.
And from that, you know, all these doors opened up for me. I wouldn't be here today if that experience hadn't happened to me. I'd still be sitting in my home, in my sheltered life in South Australia, you know, not necessarily just because of my personal experience, but, you know, what all of us have had to endure and push against. Not that I would ever say that I believe COVID was a good situation to put anyone in. It definitely was awful situation to put anyone in. But I think it really, really made it very clear for a lot of people what their values are and what they're not willing to compromise on or what they are willing to compromise on.
That was definitely the biggest thing for me. It really showed me my value. And as you said, there's a lot more of us than the mainstream narrative is that we're a very small amount of people. Well, we're not.
No, not.
Not at all. And we're actually a very powerful group of people, like a very, very powerful group of people. And this is the thing is they played their card. They made some big mistakes. And that's what I'm excited about. Yes. There is so much good in the world. And yeah, I agree. It's going to get a little bit worse, maybe a lot worse before it gets better, but I can see the other side. And it's going to be awesome. Like it's going to be magical. And my number one tip is focus on your health. You know, that physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, that's going to be your vessel needs to be able to stand through whatever's coming. And when you are solid in who you are, your belief systems, your community, doing the things that you're passionate about, laughing, playing, you know, not taking life so serious. And the thing is, when you start to understand it's a vibrational war, you could know all the facts and be a miserable sod, and you're actually playing in the dark forces side because you're in a negative state of mind. If you are just playing and enjoying life, and I'm aware of, okay, there's bad people and they're very nasty, cool, good on them. Like, they can have their agendas. Doesn't mean that they're going to win. You know, just because they have an idea of the way that they want the world to go and the globalization and all that type of nonsense, like, doesn't mean that they're going to win. And they can seem powerful because they own a few TV stations and kind of spread the message through their kind of minions, but they're not. And you're seeing it through, like, all the major TV channels are like record low numbers of people watching and people tuning into that indoctrination. People are starting to look at alternative information, not even own a TV. I don't want to watch that. I've better things to do in my life. And so we are shifting, and it's very exciting to see. And just understand that you're not alone if you are one of these people that felt pressured into making decisions and now you want to make different decisions, or you've kind of felt that, this is a scary world. It's not. There is, bad people, but there is so much good and there is so much opportunity when you start looking. And these worlds, as you said, they start to open up. Oh, wow. And you said that all the dots start to connect, and it starts to become life becomes synchronic. Is that the word? Synchronize. Yeah. There's a lot of synchronicities that start to happen in your life. And all you have to do is step out of that vibration of fear. Because that's all it is. It's if you're in a vibration of fear, that's when you move out of that, you don't live in that world anymore. you live in this whole total new world. So like I feel good in myself that I was courageous enough to sit beside South Australia's most dangerous woman. I know, alive. I'm still alive. Oh, so like, you know, you breathing, Jesus, you know, it's crazy. And, you know, that's the world. We have to take these risks. And, you know, for me, that this wasn't a risk that I was that worried about. But, you know, to other people, you know, you were scary and you were the boogie monster. So yeah, we were putting her show, all the details in the show notes.
Yeah.
And any other final words of wisdom that you would like to share?
I think the other thing is, don't forget that knowledge is power. So you understanding what you're saying and the choices that you can make and the decisions that you can make is really, really important, because through those decisions and through that knowledge, that's how we can navigate our life in terms of where we want to go. So, don't give up. Know that there's always you've always got options. There's always alternative solutions, and there is a way to win all of these difficult challenges that we are, I guess, put into for a reason.
Awesome. Thank you, Mariya, and I look forward to witnessing the rest of your journey and what's going to unfold. That's already unfolding in the background, maybe. And so exciting times for Mariya and for the rest of us. And yeah, all the notes will be in the show notes. So peace out, everyone.